The glass walls of the 42nd floor office carried every sound too clearly, too sharply, like the building itself refused to forget anything said inside it. Amina Johnson stood just outside the conference room, tablet in hand, waiting for the final approval signature that would end her first week as executive secretary to Kim Ji-hoon. She had already learned 3 things about him. He never smiled unnecessarily, he never repeated himself, and people lowered their voices when they spoke his name. Inside the room, voices softened into a casual conversation after the board meeting ended. Amina wasn't meant to hear what came next, but fate rarely asks for permission. "She's not my type," Ji-hoon said plainly, his tone calm, almost indifferent, as if discussing a document rather than a person. A brief chuckle followed from someone in the room, but Ji-hoon didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Amina's fingers paused over her tablet. For a moment the world didn't move. Not my type. She had heard worse things in life. Dismissals, doubts, subtle exclusions, but something about the ease in his voice made it sharper than anything before. Still she didn't react. Not outwardly. Her posture remained straight, her expression carefully composed, like she had not just been quietly erased from consideration in a single sentence. When the door opened, she stepped forward with practiced professionalism, eyes lowered slightly, voice steady as she greeted the executives. Ji-hoon's gaze passed over her briefly, unreadable, as if she were just another part of the office furniture. But Amina felt it now, the invisible line that had been drawn between them without her consent. And yet she didn't leave. She didn't shrink. She simply did what she had always done, she worked. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to being dismissed is to stay exactly where you are and become undeniable. If Ji-hoon expected Amina Johnson to be affected by silence or subtle rejection, he was wrong. By the 3rd day after that comment, she had already become the most reliable part of his entire schedule. The morning began before the city fully woke up. Reports were arranged before he asked for them, meetings confirmed before he approved them, and international calls scheduled across time zones with precision that even his senior assistants struggled to match. Amina didn't overstep, didn't speak unnecessarily, and never once allowed emotion to interfere with execution. Ji-hoon noticed. Not because he wanted to, but because efficiency always demanded attention. "She anticipates problems before they happen," one of the managers said during a briefing. Ji-hoon said nothing in response. But his eyes shifted briefly to Amina, who stood quietly beside the presentation screen, calmly turning pages on her tablet. She looked untouched by chaos. Unbothered. Controlled. It should have been ordinary. Yet it wasn't. During a critical investor meeting that afternoon, a file error threatened to derail a multi-million-dollar agreement. The room stiffened instantly. Executives whispered in panic. Ji-hoon's expression remained cold, but his gaze sharpened. Before he could speak, Amina stepped forward. "There's a backup version," she said calmly. No hesitation. No panic. Just certainty. Within seconds she retrieved it from the secured archive she had personally organized 2 days earlier, without being asked. The crisis dissolved. The investors smiled again. The meeting continued as if nothing had happened. But Ji-hoon didn't forget. Later that evening, as the office emptied and lights dimmed across the glass tower, he found her still working. Alone. Focused. Unmoved by the victory she had just secured for him. For the first time he studied her, not as a secretary, not as staff, but as something he hadn't categorized yet. "You handled that well," he said finally. Amina didn't look up. "It was my job, sir." Sir. The word should have kept distance intact. Instead, it didn't feel far enough anymore. And Ji-hoon didn't understand why. It was supposed to be a routine expansion meeting, just another international deal in Ji-hoon's empire of contracts, mergers, and controlled outcomes. Until it wasn't. The Tokyo partnership collapsed unexpectedly when confidential figures were leaked, triggering investor panic and a legal review that threatened to stall everything for months. The boardroom that once ran on confidence now felt tight, suffocating, uncertain. And for the first time in a long time, Kim Ji-hoon looked pressed. Not broken. Never that. But challenged. "We need a full audit of communication channels," one executive insisted. Another added, "and someone to rebuild the presentation strategy before the next negotiation window closes." Ji-hoon's gaze moved slowly across the room. Then it stopped. "Amina," he said. That was it. No explanation. No praise. Just her name, spoken like a decision already made. She didn't react outwardly, but something in the room shifted. Not because she was unqualified, everyone already knew she was capable, but because Ji-hoon rarely assigned critical damage control so directly to anyone below senior leadership. Amina simply nodded. Understood. From that moment they worked side by side. Day blended into night. Files spread across conference tables. Screens filled with projections, revised numbers, and risk maps. Ji-hoon led with precision, but Amina filled the gaps he didn't notice, correcting inconsistencies, restructuring timelines, anticipating objections before they were spoken. At one point, Ji-hoon paused mid-sentence when he realized she had already adjusted his entire negotiation structure without being asked. You changed the approach, he said, tone unreadable. Yes, she replied simply. Your original model left room for unnecessary loss. Pause. No one usually corrected him. And lived to keep speaking freely afterward. Yet she wasn't afraid. Not even slightly. Hours later, when the office emptied again, they remained behind, standing at opposite ends of the same table, the city glowing behind them like a distant audience. For the first time, Ji-hoon noticed something unsettling, not her competence, not her precision, but how naturally she fit into his chaos, as if she had always belonged in it. And that thought, more than any failed deal, unsettled him deeply. There are moments in powerful men's lives that never make it into reports, meetings, or board decisions. Moments when the mask slips without permission. For Kim Ji-hoon, it happened at 2:17 a.m. The office was nearly empty, the city below reduced to scattered lights and distant movement. Only the executive floor remained awake, and even that silence felt heavier than usual. Amina was finishing a report revision when she noticed it. Ji-hoon hadn't spoken in almost 20 minutes. That alone was unusual. When she turned slightly, she saw him seated at the far end of the conference table, one hand resting near his temple, posture still straight but less controlled than usual. The sharp edge he always carried seemed dulled by exhaustion. Sir, she said softly, breaking the silence. You should rest. No response. She walked closer, and that's when she saw it clearly. His eyes were closed. Not in focus. Not in thought. He had fallen asleep. Amina paused. For a man like Kim Ji-hoon, sleep in a workspace was not just rare, it was unheard of. He was the kind of man who treated weakness like a rumor he refused to believe in. Yet here he was. Human. Carefully, she removed her blazer and draped it over his shoulders without waking him. The movement was gentle, almost instinctive, as if something in her refused to let him remain exposed to the cold air of the office. For a long moment she simply stood there, watching him not as a CEO, not as her employer, but as a man who had forgotten how to rest without guilt. When Ji-hoon finally stirred, his eyes opened slightly. He didn't move immediately. He registered the fabric over his shoulders first, then her presence. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Amina met his gaze evenly. You were tired. A pause lingered between them, long enough for something unspoken to pass through it. Ji-hoon looked away first. But for the first time he didn't dismiss her presence. He accepted it. And that was far more dangerous than either of them realized. Power doesn't collapse loudly, it fractures in silence first. That morning, everything in Ji-hoon's world was supposed to be under control. A new investor briefing, a revised Tokyo deal structure, and a final review meeting that should have ended with victory. Instead, the numbers didn't align. A critical discrepancy in offshore accounts triggered suspicion from the board. Within hours, whispers of internal failure began spreading through departments like invisible smoke. People who once rushed to agree with Ji-hoon now hesitated before speaking. And Ji-hoon felt it. Not fear. Pressure. Amina stood beside him during the emergency meeting, watching as accusations were carefully phrased but clearly aimed. Every sentence from the board felt like a tightening rope. Explain the inconsistency, one executive demanded. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. It is being verified. That is not an answer we can take forward. The room shifted again. Uncertainty growing. Then Ji-hoon snapped, not loudly but sharply enough to silence everyone. If you doubt the system, question the process, not my leadership. The words landed heavy. Too heavy. The meeting ended abruptly after that, tension unresolved, trust cracked. When the room emptied, Ji-hoon remained standing by the glass wall, staring at the skyline as if it could rearrange itself into something easier to control. Amina didn't speak at first. She simply stayed. Minutes passed. Finally his voice came, quieter now. I should not have spoken like that. It was not an apology given easily. It was forced through pride. Amina answered carefully. You were under pressure. Pause. That is not an excuse, he said. Another silence followed, different this time. Less corporate. More human. For a rare moment, Ji-hoon looked tired in a way success could not fix. "I don't make mistakes like this," he said almost to himself. Amina's voice softened slightly. "Everyone reaches a breaking point." He turned slightly toward her. "Including you?" That question lingered longer than expected. "Yes," she admitted. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, not distance. Understanding. And for the first time, Kim Ji-hoon didn't correct her presence beside him. He simply stood there, no longer alone in the silence. Victory rarely arrives the way people imagine it. The crisis that had threatened Ji-hoon's company didn't end with celebration or applause. It ended with exhaustion, long hours, and a final correction that only Amina caught before it reached the boardroom floor. By the time the Tokyo deal was officially stabilized, the executive floor had gone quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows survival, not success. Ji-hoon stood in the center of the conference room, staring at the final approval email on the screen. He didn't speak for a long time. Amina remained nearby, waiting for instructions that didn't come. "You fixed it," he said finally. "Yes," she replied softly. "We did." That small correction, "we," hung in the air longer than intended. Ji-hoon turned toward her slowly, as if registering something new in her tone, in her presence, in everything he had been avoiding noticing. For the first time in days, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Then it happened. Without warning or calculation, Ji-hoon stepped forward and pulled her into a brief, tight hug. It wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't anything he would normally allow himself. It was relief. Raw, unfiltered relief from a man who had carried too much for too long. Amina froze for a second, surprised by the sudden closeness. But she didn't pull away. Something in the moment didn't feel dangerous. It felt human, warm, real. Ji-hoon released her almost immediately, as if realizing what he had done too late that he stepped back, expression controlled again, but not fully recovered. He began then stopped. Amina met his eyes, calm but attentive. "It's okay." That was all she said. No judgment. No confusion. No overreaction. Just acceptance. And somehow that made it worse for him. Because now he knew what it felt like. And worse. He knew he didn't want it to be the last time. Silence can be louder than confrontation when it comes from a man who is used to controlling every room he enters. The new investor arrived on a Tuesday morning, confident, well-dressed, and far too comfortable standing too close to Amina during introductions. His name was Daniel Reed, a global finance partner with a reputation for charm and persistence. He smiled too easily, spoke too smoothly, and looked at Amina like she was already part of a conversation that Ji-hoon had not been invited into. "I've heard a lot about you," Daniel said warmly, offering a handshake that lingered just a second too long. Amina responded politely, professional as always. "Likewise, Mr. Reed." Ji-hoon watched from a few steps behind. He said nothing. But he noticed everything. The way Daniel leaned in slightly when she spoke. The way he laughed at things that weren't particularly funny. The way he kept redirecting the conversation back to her instead of the deal. By midday, Ji-hoon's mood had shifted, not visibly, not openly, but internally, like a locked room growing colder. During the meeting, Daniel made a casual remark. "With someone like Ms. Johnson handling your operations, I can see why your company moves so efficiently." A compliment. Innocent on the surface. But Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Amina didn't react. She simply continued taking notes, calm as ever. After the meeting ended, Daniel requested a private follow-up discussion, with her included. Ji-hoon agreed too quickly. Too sharply. That night the office felt different. Ji-hoon stayed late again, but this time not because of work. Amina passed by his office briefly and noticed him staring at a file that had not been opened in 10 minutes. "You haven't closed it," she said gently from the doorway. "I am reviewing it," he replied. But he wasn't. Pause. Then Amina added carefully, "Mr. Reed is just a client." Ji-hoon finally looked at her. "I did not ask about him," he said. But the silence after his words betrayed him. Because for the first time, Kim Ji-hoon didn't sound indifferent. He sounded bothered. And he didn't know why he cared so much. Some departures don't begin with footsteps. They begin with silence that grows too heavy to stay inside. Amina Johnson had been preparing her transfer request for 3 days. Not because she wanted to leave the job, but because staying had started to feel like standing too close to something she wasn't supposed to feel. The office had returned to its usual rhythm after the investor visit, yet nothing felt the same. Ji-hoon was still precise, still controlled, but there was something in his gaze now that lingered too long when she spoke and drifted too quickly when she looked back. And Amina noticed everything. especially what she refused to name. That morning, she stood in front of the HR system, finalizing the internal transfer application. Her expression remained steady, but her fingers hesitated before pressing confirm. Behind her, the office doors opened. Ji-hoon entered without announcing himself as always. But he stopped the moment he saw her at the workstation. "You're early," he said. Amina turned slightly. "I needed to finish something." His eyes briefly scanned the screen beside her. Something unreadable crossed his expression. "Transfer request?" he asked. The question landed quietly, but heavily. Amina didn't deny it. "Yes." Silence followed. Not the usual professional silence they shared, but something thicker. Something unsettled. Ji-hoon stepped closer, slower than usual, as if measuring each movement carefully. "You are leaving because of dissatisfaction?" he asked. Amina shook her head slightly. "No." Another pause. "Then why?" he pressed. That question held more weight than it should have. Amina finally met his eyes fully. "Because staying is becoming complicated." Ji-hoon didn't respond immediately. For once, his control didn't offer him an answer fast enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "I was wrong," he said. Amina blinked slightly, surprised not by the words, but by how quickly they came. "You are not replaceable," he continued more carefully now. "And I should not have made you feel otherwise." A long silence followed. Then quieter than before. "You matter here. Not as an employee. Not as a tool. But as something he hadn't fully learned how to define yet." And for the first time since she met him, Amina saw Ji-hoon not as a man above emotion, but as one finally trying to understand his own. There are moments when words arrive too late, and only silence knows what they were meant to say. The company deal closed that afternoon. No emergency. No crisis. No tension hanging over their heads for once. Just success settling quietly into place like something earned after too many sleepless nights. The executive floor slowly emptied as employees left in relief, laughter returning in small fragments down the corridors. But Ji-hoon and Amina remained behind, as they often did when the world finally calmed down. Only this time the atmosphere was different. Less professional distance. More awareness. Amina stood by the window watching the city below. Ji-hoon remained a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, unusually still. "You didn't leave," he said finally. Amina turned slightly. "Neither did you." A faint pause followed. That exchange felt heavier than it should have. Ji-hoon stepped closer, stopping just within a respectful distance, but not as far as before. Close enough that silence between them no longer felt empty. "I meant what I said," he added quietly. "About you staying." Amina's gaze softened slightly. "I heard you." Another pause. Neither of them moved away. Neither of them filled the silence too quickly. It was Ji-hoon who moved first. Not with authority. Not with control. But with hesitation. He stepped forward and gently pulled her into a second hug. This time it wasn't sudden. It wasn't shock. It was intention. Amina froze only for a moment before her hands lightly rested against him, not resisting, not rushing, just present. The kind of presence that doesn't demand explanation. Ji-hoon didn't tighten his grip like before. He didn't let go quickly either. He just stayed there. As if trying to understand what peace felt like in a place he had never allowed it before. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Don't leave." Amina didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because for the first time, leaving didn't feel like the only option anymore. And in that quiet space between them, something unspoken finally stopped running away. People often think love announces itself loudly, through grand gestures, dramatic confessions, or perfectly timed moments. But for Kim Ji-hoon, it arrived quietly, through realization. It didn't happen in a boardroom. It didn't happen in a crisis. It happened in the simplest moments he once overlooked. When Amina corrected a report without making him feel small, when she stayed late without being asked, when she looked at him like he wasn't untouchable, just human. And suddenly, everything he once believed about types felt meaningless. The phrase he had said so casually weeks ago now echoed differently in his mind. "She's not my type." He had been wrong. Completely. The company held a press briefing that morning to announce the successful Tokyo partnership recovery. Executives filled the room, cameras flashed, and expectations rose as Ji-hoon stepped forward to speak. Amina stood slightly behind him as she always did. Professional. Composed. Quiet. But this time, Ji-hoon paused before speaking. A silence spread across the room. He turned slightly, not to the cameras, not to the executives, but to her. Amina met his gaze, confused for a fraction of a second. Then he spoke. This success did not happen because of one person, he said calmly. It happened because of someone who corrected my mistakes before the world saw them. Murmurs moved through the room. Ji-hoon continued, voice steady but firm. And I once made a judgment I was wrong about. Pause. His eyes remained on her. I said she was not my type. Silence fell instantly. Even the camera seemed to hesitate. Then, softer, almost personal. I was wrong about that too. Amina's breath caught slightly but she didn't look away. Ji-hoon stepped back from the podium just enough to close the distance between them instead of the audience. Not touching her. Not breaking professionalism completely. But standing beside her, publicly, intentionally. For the first time, he said, voice lower now, I understand what I actually meant. A pause that held everything. She was never not my type. His gaze softened just slightly. She was the only type I never knew how to recognize. The room remained silent. But Amina didn't need applause. Because in that moment she already understood. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a choice. And for the first time, Kim Ji-hoon wasn't building an empire alone anymore.